I just got chills. What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome to another scary story collection type thing that we've been doing on this channel for a couple of weeks now. I obviously still haven't quite found out what I'm going to call this series, so bear with me. Or if you've got any suggestions, put it down below. Now, today, instead of talking about spooky locations, we are going to be talking about actual ghosts. And as always, let's just jump straight into the video. My friend's family owned 100 plus acres of land just outside a suburb in Utah. It was well known for being by some massive Native American archaeology digs, and they suspected that there was a permanent settlement on the land at some point because of the mass amount of pottery and other artifacts that they would pull up when they tilled the land. On top of that, there was a historical building there at one point that was torn down. I'm not going to disclose what building it was because a Google search would give tons of personal info about the family. Because all of this history, it was bound to be filled with some paranormal things. Though unfortunately for us, we didn't know about any of these things until after the things started happening. I remember the first thing that happened to us was hearing screaming and arguing down by the pond. It sounded like a man and a woman, but we couldn't pick up any words. We had everyone in our group point their car lights and spotlights at the pond, but there was nothing, although the arguing continued. Next up, it was just my friend and I. While we were leaving, we were closing up the gate. My friend hopped out of the car to lock up the gate. A moment after he stepped out and started fiddling with the lock, I was looking straight forward and saw the detailed silhouette of a child run across my view. It took less than 2 seconds for it to cross, but you could see everything from its hair floating about freely and its clothing moving about. I was dumbstruck. I honestly didn't know how to handle it, so I just drove my friend home and made my way home with all the lights inside my car on. Not long after that, things started kicking up. We would see that child frequently, whether he was playing in the trees or messing with the cows. But what became really concerning was when my friend let me and a girl I was with make out in the back of the car. My friend left us alone while he took a walk. We were tucked away from the main field and were up against the railroad tracks. On my friend's walk, he decided to climb a steep pile of rocks that were leading to the top and just dicked about up there for a bit. He was about to look down and laugh at us. He thought he would see the car rocking or whatever, but that's when he froze. He didn't know what made him do it, but he looked over more cautiously and he saw a being looking into the window of the car and moving about the vehicle. Mind you, it was a full moon. It was a clear night and you could easily see just about everything. But he said the best he could describe was that the thing he saw was something darker than just the complete absence of light. Something his eyes were constantly trying to focus on, but couldn't, because they just couldn't fathom, like, vast emptiness of light. Needless to say, he was terrified, and he was about to scream, but this thing looked up into him and lifted its shadowy hand to its face in a shushing motion. And then he just stood there for about half an hour before it moved its way into the field and disappeared into the foliage. Thankfully, I had turned the car on, and that's when I saw him coming down. And the moment he hopped in, we were able to leave. And then, a few months after that, him and I plus another friend were having a campfire in the trees. It was near the center of the property, and I had my car running, the headlights were on, so we could see just about everything in the dark. 10 minutes into that, we all heard an extremely loud whistling coming from just behind the car. Now, I blew this off as our music at first, but then I remembered that I'd turned the volume down to 5 while we were parking. In my car, the volume has to be at about 20 for you to hear it, and God knows how high it would have to be for it to be as loud as that whistling was. So we just sat there and listened, and it went on for nearly 2 minutes. All of us recognized the tune, but we weren't able to place it. We were all creeped out, but by this point, we were used to creepy things happening, so we soldiered on from there. After that, we heard screaming coming from an area where the building used to be, and it could only be compared to the scream that my sister used to make when she had night terrors. My friend was a well-seasoned hunter, and he was familiar with foxes, rabbits, owls, and any other animal that was native to Utah, and he didn't believe that that sound could have come from any of them. We left. We were done. But as we were leaving, I had my Gigi Allen CD playing, and the song When I Die came on. After we all listened for a moment, we realized that it was the same tune that that thing was whistling behind the car. So whatever this thing was, it was intelligent enough to copy music it was hearing and powerful enough to whistle it loudly for a long time. Now this last thing was the final straw for us. His family sold the property and we were essentially paying our final respect to all the beer, women and fire that we had chugged, laid and created over the time period that we hung out there. After sitting in the car and talking about our memories for a while, both of us all of a sudden had the strange urge to hop out and piss. We were both extremely anxious about it and we felt kind of sick. As we were rushing along with our business, my friend looks down and rustled the side of the bush to see if anything would come out like a lizard or a toad. When he looks down, his blood went cold and he heard a scratchy, malicious, and purely terrifying voice say, "Hi," in its airy, drawn-out fashion. I was across the car doing the exact same thing and I heard the exact same voice say hi. But I thought he was just being a dick and I thought he was trying to scare me. So I hop back in the car and he looks at me with a face of fear and terror that I hadn't seen since our first near-death experience together. And all he said was "F***ing drive." While we were driving, he told me everything and we haven't been there since and we have no plan on going back. I know it was supposed to be about one experience, but when it comes down to it, the existence of that place was a terrifying experience for all who stepped foot on it. So good fucking riddance. And good luck to the new developers who will be putting people's homes and lives on that land. Okay, so the next one, I'm just going to quickly read out to you what a banshee is, and I got this from the Wikipedia page on what exactly a banshee was. Because when I read this story, it mentioned a banshee and I was like, is that like some sort of animal? But no, it's not. So the banshee is a predictor of death. If someone is about to enter a situation where it is unlikely they will come out alive, a banshee, which is a woman, will usually warn people by screaming or wailing. Giving rise to a banshee is also known as a woman wailing. So basically a banshee is like an Irish, English, I think, urban legend of when someone's about to die, and particularly someone from a particular heritage is going to die, there will be the sounds of a woman wailing or screaming or crying extremely loudly. Okay, so let's get into the story. I'm Irish and I was living in Tyrone. Is that how you say it? I'm sorry if I've just mispronounced where you live. But I was living in Tyrone when this happened. This was about 7 years ago. I was laying in my bed in my parents' house and my bed was right by the window. This was when I was woken up by a horrible screaming, wailing noise in the back of our house at 3 a.m. Now, if you watched the last video that I posted, you'll know that 3 a.m. is like, it's not a good time to be awake. That's like the devil's hour or something like that. Anyways, back to the story. The noise sounded like a terribly injured cat, but it was crossed with the noise of a screaming woman and a child. I opened the window and I looked out. That's when I heard the noise again, but it was coming from the back garden of the house next door. Then, one more time from the third house, and then it stopped. This was the most terrifying, awful noise I had ever heard, and my mind immediately jumped to, holy heck, was that the sound of a banshee? And then the rational part of my mind was going, don't be silly, that's just an urban legend. But something about that completely terrified me, and I knew that something wasn't right about it, but I tried to convince myself that it was a cat that had been hit by a car and crawled off into many hedges and bushes behind our houses to die. I went downstairs to go and check and see if I could find it, and that's when I saw that my own cat was lying fast asleep. If my cat had heard it too, he would have been at the window looking out. It was only then that I had realized that it was only me who heard it. And that's when I freaked out. I went back to bed, but the next morning I was talking to my mum at breakfast. That's when I asked her if she had also heard the noise. She said, no, but did you hear the news? The man that lives 2 doors down from us dropped dead at 3 a.m. last night. You must have heard the banshee. I just got chills. I know a lot of people think the whole fairies thing in Ireland is just made up for tourists, but actually, pretty much everybody who lives here has seen or heard stuff like this, or knows other people who have. Most families have a story about hearing a banshee before somebody dies. It was honestly the most horrible noise I've ever heard, and I sincerely hope I never hear it again. It wasn't a fox or a cat, and our house has loads of foxes around it. They screech pretty much constantly, and it's a sound that is totally different. Lots of wailing cats too, yet my own cat didn't hear the noise. Also, there was no way that it could have been an animal moving from garden to garden because, as well as the high hedges, each garden is securely fenced between each hedge. But the sound somehow moved from one garden to the next and stopped 2 houses down. You guys, this is the first time that I've ever heard of like a banshee, obviously because I had to look it up. But that sounds pretty convincing to me, especially because if you live in that area, I'm pretty sure you know the distinction between foxes and cats wailing to a woman / something else screaming and wailing. I know that the majority of my viewership are like American, and then the next one is like slightly Australian. So I don't think that I've got any Irish people on my channel, but if you are Irish or you know anything about banshees or you've heard stories about this, I want to know more because that is so interesting and also scary. I did have one more story, but this video is already going too long, so I think I'm going to film that story right after this one and I'll publish it next week. But it is it's an extremely long story, so I think it'll be a video on its own. So stay tuned for next week. Give this video a thumbs up if you like me reading these stories, because it tells me that you like me reading these stories. And again, if you have a true story that you'd like me to read out, or you want me to turn into a story time, submit your story in an email. Send it to submitstorytime@gmail.com. Make sure you include all the screenshots, all the photos, or any evidence if you have it. Just make sure that you cross out names and photos because it will always be an anonymous story time. It's totally fine if you don't have any additional things like screenshots, but make sure you don't leave out any detail because that's what makes these stories amazing and unique. Anyways, you guys, I would love to have you on my team. So if you like my vibe, click subscribe. I do a True Crime Sunday every Sunday. I try and do a story time every single week, and I do these true Reddit reads every single week as well. So click subscribe and I will see you in the next one.